Hello and welcome to episode 2 and season 2 of Steering Success. We have an amazing guest today, Mohammed Dhedhi from Kearney. This is a guest that we have been trying back and forth for a while. I will take full responsibility for so many rescheduling that I've been doing, but very happy to have you on board. Welcome.
Great, thanks. Great to be here. Looking forward to a chat today.
Yeah, so am I. I want to get straight into it. Your career is quite an interesting career, especially in that consulting space. Can you give us a bit of a sort of snapshot of your journey to date?
Yeah, sure. So let me start. So I'm an engineer by background, so from the US. I started in technology consulting. I started my career at Deloitte. Spent about 5 years there. Realized that, technology was probably too narrow of a space for me, as strange as it sounds today, right? 20 years later.
Yeah.
So I decided to go to business school, and then I moved. I still knew I wanted to be in consulting, but maybe more broader. So I went into strategy consulting. I started at Kearney first as a summer intern, and then in their Chicago office for a few years. Then, as is kind of, following the pack mentality, I decided, maybe I've had my run with consulting and it's time to go into industry. And I left the consulting business in 2015 and spent about 3.5 years at Mondelez, which is Cadbury, Oreo, large consumer goods player. Again, on a strategy and M&A role, and really enjoyed it, really got into the depth of it, but, did not really enjoy the fact that it was the same set of stakeholders, same set of challenges. Wasn't getting that excitement.
Yeah.
At that time, naturally, I just happened to meet Kearney's head of the region for the Middle East and Africa. He just happened to be in Chicago. There was an event, and I started talking to him, and conversations started going, and had a discussion with my wife at home, and we thought, okay, this could be an interesting play, maybe for a couple of years to see what it looks like.
It's always a couple of years,
It's always a couple of years, right? So 6 years later, and now every time we go back to the US, we wonder why we were living here in the first place. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the quality of life, the life in this part of the world, and also the work is exciting, right? So at the end of the day, at least a lot of happiness when you work in a career like consulting is actually linked to the satisfaction you get from working with your clients. Right?
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed out here. I've had a chance to shape the business. The growth of our business has been phenomenal, right? So I was maybe 100 and some employee when I came in 2018.
Wow.
And I'm sure as you may know, we're over 1,000 people in the region today, right? So it's also been great to be part of such a growth journey for the region as well. So that's kind of what brings me.
What would you say are the key milestones? Can you identify them throughout your career that actually help you shape your career to date from where you are now?
Yeah, I think the first was probably, being a computer science major for my bachelor's and choosing to go into consulting, right? It was, at that time, it was a non-traditional path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bringing engineers into investment banking or consulting roles was very new at the time, right? So just doing that probably was the first step to get a more wider exposure than your typical, for us, it was typically those coding or development roles.
Yeah, of course.
Then probably the MBA was the next big pivot.
Yeah.
And then the last one would be, probably taking the risk to come to the Middle East, right? I was in a very good place, but I thought it would just be exciting to do. Right. So those are probably 3 big ones that I can highlight.
So that third one, that risk of sort of leaving where you're quite comfortable and you're successful and you're doing well in your job, in your life, what are the real triggers for someone like yourself, who's living abroad, to say, I'm going to move to the other side of the world, to a market that I haven't really sort of known too much about, and I'm going to just dip my toes in and see whether or not I can make a career and a life out there?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So obviously I'd been through Dubai at different times as a tourist or a visitor of sorts. I'd had some exposure to the Middle Eastern markets from my different roles, right? When you work for when your client's a global company, you understand. So you had some feeling of what it's like, but yes, it is a risk. I think the first thing that comes up is that, it's probably this thinking, and I call it thinking because there's no real timing around this. It's like, this is the right time. If I don't do it now, I'll never do it, right? So there's a little bit of FOMO, if you will. I think the second thing is like, what can you do to hedge such a risk, right? And for me, it was like returning home to Kearney. So I knew that at the end of the day, or I felt that, if things didn't work out for the Middle East, I could probably, I could always go back.
Like a safety net almost,
So
right?
there was like, I created a safety net, right? And then obviously we've obviously heard of a lot of good stories, but a lot of stories that might be challenging, right, when people come to the Middle East in terms of expectations. So we also planned it in a way that, I came almost 8 months before the family moved, right?
Right.
So,
Smart.
that gave enough runway to understand, is this something we want to do? Is getting back to that routine, right? Because remember, I hadn't been traveling regularly in my industry role, but now being on the road and at least for the first 2 or 3 years, I was, 4 days a week in Saudi.
Yeah.
Right. So, is that a life that we want to start living again? Is that something we can do again? So, we hedged ourselves as best as we could. And,
and that sort of advice, I think, because we give it all the time to our candidates who are moving from abroad, is if they can, come on your own first, set yourself up, get settled, because it's not only moving abroad with your family that you got to occupy your headspace with, but it's also setting into your new job and actually getting your feet under the desk to actually start building that momentum and so forth. So when you couple it together and you're doing it at the same time, I did that. I came with my wife and a 6-month-old. We were pregnant with our second 2 weeks after we landed. It was mayhem, right? More so for my wife, unfortunately, because she had to endure it all while I was going to work and seeing the city and meeting clients and meeting candidates and really living the life while she was at home nursing a newborn and pregnant with a second. You don't really take that into account until you look back 3 or 4 years later and realize how difficult it was.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that, like, it's also living in a new country which got different rules, different administrative processes. I mean, all these things are different. So I'm not going to comment whether they're good or bad, but it's just different. Opening a bank account in the UAE is different than it is in other parts of the world, right? So you add all of these things on, like, it's really, you need time and you need space to get through it, because, it's just the reality of being in a new market.
Our wives getting a driver's license is different. You need an NOC. Like, when I first heard that, I was like, what do you mean? I have to give them permission to drive? Okay, this is interesting.
Great.
But there's all these things, they are different. And you're right, it's not good or bad. It's just it's so different. The visa process, the medical insurance, everything like that, right? How you get your rental property when it comes to 4 checks or even 1 check back in the day as well.
I'm not used to 1 check. I'm used to paying monthly.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Direct debit as well. No checks. So why are we giving checks sort of thing? So, okay. And in relation to your pivot, like, what was the main driver? Was it just the boredom or just the tedious nature of your sort of tech sort of a career prior to actually going into that consulting space?
So prior to going to consulting, I mean, I just felt that there was more to making impact at my clients, right? So less, I was in the ERP world, so driving ERP transformations obviously are large programs. They create a lot of value. But the reality is, there's so much more and so many more interesting topics, at least for me, than really getting deep into the ERP space. I really want to be more broader, right? So that's when I realized that strategy consulting was better, at least as an outset. And then obviously, there was that, I'd been 4 or 5 years in the workforce. So yes, getting an MBA or a graduate degree made sense. And then, the MBA was probably the right pivot to getting there.
Is there a huge difference between the consulting life in the MENA region as opposed to North America?
In terms of, well, yes and no. So in terms of what we look for in our people, no. Right. So maybe we'll take the campus example, because that's the place where we go and we interview for all our offices. So we look for the same thing. I think once you get here, at least when you compare the two markets, I think in the US or Europe even is a much more mature consulting market. So the businesses are a lot more mature. They're in that stage where driving shareholder value and the scale at which they operate requires, a very specific intervention. Right. So it could be that, hey, how do I reduce my packaging costs? And, for a Fortune 50 company, reducing packaging costs could drive $200-300 million of improvement. So those are like the projects that you'll see a lot of consulting firms do, in addition to all the cool ones about, market entry, et cetera. But that's where really the value gets unlocked. The Middle East in some ways is very different, right? Like we're nation building, we're economy building, we're region building, right? So a lot of the things we're actually doing are much more visionary in nature. The also exciting part is that there is a profit motive or there is a money-making motive, but there's also a motive to develop society, right? Which is really interesting because, at the end of the day, some investments that make sense on both are always good investments, but at sometimes you have to trade off that, hey, is society's development or society's progress more important than taking a route that could generate more money? And those are the kind of decisions we face almost every day as consultants, right? At least those who serve the public sector. In the private sector, it's a little bit more interesting. The last few years have really been about, how do I take advantage of the Saudi market, right? It's growing. There's a lot of opportunity. Beyond that, there's Egypt, there's parts of Africa, there's Pakistan, there's Turkey. I mean, the region is very dynamic. It's got epicenter of wealth, with the oil economies kind of at the center, but it's got huge population centers and huge population with a lot of potential kind of surrounding it, right? With all these emerging markets. So in the private sector is very much how do you tap into that growth? How do you get, in the developed markets like Saudi, how do you enter, how do you form that base? Because you have a large population that's going to enter the workforce that has a lot of spending potential. Yep. Right. And I do a lot of my work in the private sector. So I deal with that a lot. But then if you look at Egypt, you have probably a ground floor opportunity to get into that market early on. And let's say all the larger players are there, but really to double down in that market because that, like Turkey, like Pakistan, are massive, massive opportunities, right? Just given the size of the population.
Definitely. Can we go back to Saudi? Saudi's big, right? When I'm finding myself going there once or twice a month, where it's becoming more and more regular. I think back to 9 years ago when I moved to the region, the role that I was originally offered was a Dubai-based Saudi role. So live in Dubai, work in Saudi for pretty much 5 days a week. That was meant to be my role when I first moved here. That kind of pivoted for various different reasons. But now it feels like half my life is in Saudi and it's probably going to increase as time goes on because there's just so much opportunity there. What I see when I jump on these flights is a lot of you. There are just so many of you. I eavesdrop into the conversations on the planes where there's one from one firm to another, and they exchange business cards, and they find out what they're doing, but they're very cagey about what they share and what they can sort of disclose about the work they're doing. So how insane is it over the last sort of 12 months with the sort of work and the focus in that part of the world?
It's been a roller coaster ride. I mean, to put it simply, I think the growth and the momentum as what we've grown has been crazy. I mean, it's almost like there have been so many opportunities. There's so many different programs. There's so many different areas where the government is pushing reform, which is great.
Yeah.
So we've really seen that run up, and you're also seeing that there's been a lot of thinking, but now there's a lot of doing. So a lot of the work we are also doing is how can we help you kind of, crawl, walk, run, right? So to speak, right? So, there's a lot of the journey is also changing. But there's so much. I mean, you look at any single area and you look at the amount of work that needs to be done, right? Like I was talking to someone about the social development space in Saudi, and, the things you have to do in terms of creating the policy for reform. And that's at the ministry level, then cascading it down to the different funding entities that can provide those grants and those development opportunities, those things for, let's say, people of determination. Then it's how does the private sector get involved? And, we're only at step one, right? So all the step 2, step 3, step 4, and how it gets into the private sector and how you actually access those people. And that's just one small strand, right? Now, you got the mega projects on one side, but you got the business as usual Saudi as well, right? Like you have to do things at the ministerial level. So a lot of work. This year, we did begin to see a bit of a slowdown. So obviously they're also reviewing impact budgets, etc.
Yeah, of course.
And I think it's always important to evaluate how dependent are we on external advisors of any sort versus kind of doing things in-house. So we're seeing a little bit of that come through, but anything of critical priority for the country still remains relevant and important.
And you mentioned earlier about having an impact, and this part of the world gives you a sort of platform or an opportunity to have more of an impact on your clients or with your clients or in a region. Yeah. Are you seeing that, still, like especially in parts like Saudi or Egypt and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, just going back to that thread a bit is, at all levels, you are, you're making an impact, right? So, one of the more interesting thing was, I came here as a manager. And managers have a support role when it comes to business development, but I found myself at the heart of business development because, you know, there was just so much to do. There were people I was meeting. They wanted to say, hey, can you help us think through this? And you find yourself operating at different levels at different times. So that opportunity to be wider, to do different things, to really push yourself into different parts of the consulting life or the life cycle is also there. And that is linked to impact because everybody, even on your client side, is trying to do something. They've been given tasks to create something or to develop something. And they're also relying on people who they have a good equation with or someone they trust from a content perspective, right?
Your career obviously has gone from sort of early days in the consulting space, and then all the way through now to a partner level. When you're talking to individuals who are sort of finding their feet and they're sort of just getting used to this sort of life, like what advice would you give them to be able to sort of stick through it and be able to perform at the highest level?
Yeah, so stick through it is a discussion we always have in the industry, right? Like it's not for everybody, and that's okay. We also need some of our best talent to become our future clients. So like it's very clear there's no expectation that every single analyst is going to find their way through partner. But what is it that helps someone, right? So I think first of all, you have to love the idea of working at several places and several times. I like that. I discovered that when I left. I did not know that was really something that triggered me until I moved to industry, right? But for some people, right, they like to be in a place where it's a safe space. They have depth of knowledge. They're building they're building their depth in one area, and they feel comfortable doing that, right? Others don't. Then there's what excites you. For me, I also learned that the thrill I learned when I came to the region, the thrill of closing a sale, so like finding a new client or selling a new project, I mean, it was exciting, right? So like getting that, kind of simple problem statement, unpacking it into what we think should be a solution that we propose, like that process for me really excites me. And the more you move up in the ranks of consulting, the more you have to spend your time there to the point where you're actually advising someone on, hey, looking at your business outside in, this is actually the 3 problems we see, and then then moving to solutions. So you have to realize you have to understand what the role requires and what it needs. I think when it comes to also hours and the work-life balance, all of these things are openly discussed. It's certainly an aspect of it. There's certainly places where you'll work less, but you may not be satisfied. Like I also look at both of them hand in hand. I probably work the same amount of hours when I was in industry as I do in my consulting life, right? So, but the impact and the outcomes of those were not satisfying to me relative to consulting. So I also felt that if I'm going to work the same hours, might as well do it, right? In a place that I like, right?
Yeah, of course.
So there's all of these things you have to factor in. People can justify the hours if they have satisfaction at work. So my first question is like, make sure that what we're doing actually excites you, and then the rest kind of falls in place, right? Also, you get a lot more control over your schedule as you move up, right? So
definitely,
manager's probably the trickiest role probably in the industry, if you ask me.
Is that because it's kind of like in the middle where you've got some seniority but you don't have enough, or?
Well, so it's basically like you are in charge of running the project. So everyone on your team who's reporting into you on that project relies on you. You got the client who sees you as the central point of contact, so they're always basically coming at you. And then you have people like me who are always calling you to say, hey, what's happening? What's this? When am I going to see this? When am I going to see that? Right? So it's like that pressure point of everything, right? So, but that's also, if you ask me, a very good learning experience, right? So even if you have ambitions to be an executive outside of consulting, it's a good place because eventually, you're going to find yourself in that role anywhere, right? If you have a high responsibility role, even in industry.
You mentioned the not everyone makes it through, and some actually become clients afterwards, right? And I had a bit of a chuckle just to myself then because, we have in our industry, probably more so than any other industry, we deal with people on 2 sides of the coin. If I speak to a VP of HR, as a client. They could be working at your organization, and I'll talk to them as a client on how we can provide talent for them. All right. And we have a different level of conversation. As soon as that coin flips and that VP of HR is now, he or she is now on the market and looking for work, there is a completely different conversation in how they value us, treat us, speak to us, right? Because we are such a valuable asset in their lives, because we're the ones who are opening the doors. We try and bridge the gap as much as possible and try and have the difference between the two to be as minimal as possible, because we just see it being too difficult to navigate those waters when it comes to that, because we get someone who loves us when they're on the market and doesn't love us so much when we are talking to them as a supplier. Okay. Have you had bad experiences or one that you can maybe share without naming names about someone who you've worked alongside and all of a sudden became a client and became a very difficult client or something like that, where you're thinking, you left there scratching your head and saying, why are you doing this? When you know what we do and you know the other side of it?
Yeah. So I mean, there's several examples, but I think at the crux of it is like, people treat you differently also based on sometimes the expectations you also set.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, this whole bit about being treated as a supplier versus being treated as a partner, etc., comes up a lot in our business. Right. So,
and for us as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. So on the one hand, right, so a lot of our work is issued through, let's say, public portals, right? Especially our public sector work is very very strategic, or very structured, sorry, in terms of how the process is run, et cetera, et cetera. So there's really no room for you to exert any influence or relationship, right? On the private sector, obviously, it's a bit different. It's almost entirely relationship driven. Yes, they have their rules, et cetera, but relationship plays a larger value. And at least there, like, I'm always very clear that, like, treat me like a partner, not like a supplier. So don't send me emails that say, like, after we spent so many months talking, don't send me emails that say, dear supplier, based on tender number XYZ. Like, we need to have more of a conversation and shape things. So you do see that some of it is also driven by the way procurement of services is done in the region. So there's some elements you can't remove. But at the end of the day, what we aspire to do is just build strong relationships with our clients, because eventually, like, there's the procurement process and then there's a decision process, right? And you realize that while they have to be in sync, the value of the relationship has to come through, because the business buyer at the end does have a say, right, in who gets awarded. It's not just about lowest price or anything like that, right?
Is there typically pushback when you said that you're giving them the advice on their business from the outside looking in, and here are the 3 points, 5 points that we're seeing in your business? Is there pushback like, no, you're seeing this all wrong?
Yeah. I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, but that's also, there's a lot of factors that play into it, right? The first can be, you may have genuinely got it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to, outside. No, usually no. I mean, we try, like, we plan our best to speak to different experts, to speak to different people. But hey, we may not know some nuance, or we may not have known about some decision internally that the business may have taken. So it happens. The second is just genuine. Not a lot of people like to hear criticism, or nice criticism may be strong, but that's really how it's taken, right? And it's like, I've been doing this for X number of years. What do you know? We get that, and that's also part of it. And then you have people who genuinely are open to it. One thing that's for sure is people do read what you send them.
Really?
Right. So even if they're reacting negatively, it's not that they're just reacting negatively and being dismissive. They've gone through it, right? At that point, like, and for me, that's an important element, because at the end, you need to, you may not get the best outcome every time, but you need to generate recall, because our business is also about recall, and especially, Carney, while having a very strong brand in this region, right? We're definitely in probably the top 3 or top 4 players in the region. We don't have that same brand recall globally, right? So a lot of the activity we do from a marketing and branding standpoint certainly is about generating more recall, right? Because we're not the first company that comes to mind when it comes to consulting, right? So we do have to kind of, play that challenger brand roles. So for us, getting that recall and those outreaches really matter for us, even if they're not in the best light, because they at least remember, hey, this guy had a point of view, right? So let me pull it back up, or let's see what they have to say on this topic. That's part of how we go to market.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can we touch on the verticals that
Yeah.
you work on? Like, can you give us an insight into where you specialize in the most?
Yeah, so when I came to the region, I was more of a generalist.
Yeah.
So did my rounds at public sector, big public sector accounts that Carney has. Today, I am aligned with what's called consumer and retail.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's looking at more of our private sector business. There are some public sector opportunities in this space as well, because policy and legislation and market making needs to happen properly at the government level, especially in Saudi. So I do a lot of work primarily on that side, right? So think of your large retail groups, your large mall operators, right, in the region. They're all conglomerates, right? So in the region, we don't work directly for the brand or the international brand. We work for the parent.
Yeah.
Right. So we do a lot of work for them around. We've been doing work for them around growth, around obviously broader transformation, both organizational, cost, etc., and also now a lot in towards digital.
Okay. On the digital side, the impact of digital transformation in retail. Can you give us some insights into that?
Yeah, I mean it's massive. I mean, you can talk about e-commerce, but that's really just kind of touching.
Yeah.
It's just the beginning of digital. It's just a way to shop, really.
Yeah.
But I think the way we look at digital, the way I look at digital is, you look at it from a customer lens. So the customer journey starts at discovery. So when they're searching for what they want to buy, and it goes all the way through to the buying of it, the paying of it, and then the overall experience, like the post-purchase experience, right?
Yeah.
And there's a digital intervention, if you think about it, in every step.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So how you discover now, you used to discover when you went to the mall or you went to a shop. Now you discover at home. Chances are that I might be sitting with you when I'm discovering it, and I might say, hey, what do you think? So that whole, there's a whole aspect of doing it on your phone. There's doing it together.
Yeah.
There's doing it away from the shop.
Yeah.
Then you may want to order it then. You may want to come and try it on, or you may want to see what it looks like. And there's a whole element of now AR and VR that's coming in, right? And a lot of the big social media players like Snap, etc., are really getting into this. Then there's the actual buying of the product, right? And whether you do it online, whether you do it in store, how you do it, or you may buy it and go pick it up. You may, you may order, it may get delivered, but you may pay for it in installments, right? There's all of these different combinations of this omni-channel world. But even the product getting to the store now has different interventions, right? Your supply chain efficiencies, how different digital interventions can help you decide where product is at any point, where it's moving, where you have stock, how you move stock. Can you get it from a store in Dubai Mall to a store in the Mall of Emirates, right? Like having that visibility also improves the overall customer experience because you have to wait less.
Yeah.
Right. And then post-purchase is also just kind of how do you build loyalty? How do you track? I mean, so every step of the way there's something, and it's all just driving towards, this customer experience, right? Because to get a customer's attention today is becoming harder and harder because the options continue to grow.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you hear a lot these days about like Shein and Temu and all these Chinese players who are playing the cost game to get in. I mean, but these are real threats to the industry. Yeah. I mean, like if you look at the kind of market share,
stop buying from them.
Yeah, I hear you. My family too.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're really taking market share.
Yeah.
The numbers actually speak, right? So yeah, it's
and you advise on all those touch points throughout the whole journey
at different points. Yeah. So I think we spent probably a lot more of our time on the front end, less on the post-purchase. Payments is anyways more of it's a topic that's very well understood in the region, right? With the credit card players, the buy now, pay later players. So we don't get so involved, and that's very technical.
Yeah.
But I would say leading up to that, we're involved in how to build the right assortment.
Yeah.
How to build the right, how to make sure it gets there, what inventory availability looks like in store versus inside a warehouse, all of it. And then, on the front end, how do you market? What is digital marketing? What is the cost per click? What is the right way to market? What are the right channels?
Okay.
Yeah, we've been doing all that work. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And we're in a region where we're famous for either trying to be the best or the first at something, all right? And sometimes both. All
Yeah.
right? When you compare digital transformation in the industry that you're working in, that consumer retail space, as opposed to other parts of the world, are we ahead of the curve? Are we way behind other parts of the world? Or how do you see it?
So I would say we're slightly behind, and the gap is closing, but I'll explain why, right? It's also the structure of the industry here, right? So a lot of the digital interventions in some ways need to be aligned with parent brands, right? And I'll give you an example of homegrown brands and why they've been able to do more as well. So a lot of times if you have a large brand and they have launched a digital intervention globally, they will ask you as our brand partner who we serve, right, the large conglomerate, to say, hey, this is what we're bringing in. This is a loyalty program we're bringing in, or this is a, technology we're bringing in, right? Like think about Zara, right? You don't scan anything. You just drop you just go there and they have RFID and they know, but that's something that came globally. It's not something that was invented here, right? So you're also dependent on that. And obviously, as a franchisor, which is a master franchisor, your job is really to operate well.
Yeah.
To innovate well is exciting, but you need to innovate at the group level, right? You don't know. So, the innovation from a digital standpoint you would see at some of the group levels is when you have a common e-commerce platform with different brand skins, right? So, Landmark could be a good example. So they're a homegrown brand, but they've really pushed forward when it comes to digital because there's they set their agenda, right? So they've done a lot of things that link up all their brands to make it seamless between brands. The overall customer experience. Obviously, they have their same warehouses. They get to choose their course. And when you see those kind of examples, and you have a few in Saudi as well, their progress is definitely one to watch, right? They may have been slow at the beginning, but they've really caught up.
Okay. Sustainability is a key word. It's a buzzword. It's been flying around. I think 9 years ago, disruption and innovation were the key words, but sustainability is definitely one now. The impact, or what does sustainability mean in the retail world for you from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be maybe slightly blunt. I mean, the reality is sustainability is important. It's not something we can ignore. And it's a topic of discussion at every kind of CXO that we meet, is trying to figure out what to do. The reality is when you look at the data, we don't see customers paying for sustainability. But there's a lot of interest. So I may ask you, to put you on the spot, like, hey, how do you think about it? You may give me some nice answers. But if I then take your credit card statement and I try and figure out, did you actually spend 10% more, 15% more? I won't see that correlation.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's where I think, I think there's more to be done, right? There's more to educate the customer. There's more from the brands to really push this as an agenda item. And someone really needs to put a stake in the ground and says, like, this is what it's going to be. One great example is plastic bags. Single-use plastic bags is gone now, right?
Yep.
So until somebody and the government did not make a strong stance, people did not adapt. But the minute that happened and the minute it hurt your pocket, right, everyone started carrying plastic bags into the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that you actually need to drive sustainability, because as it stands, in an environment like we live in today, where there's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of growth, but there's a lot of challenges, it's very difficult for people to vote with their wallet, right?
Yeah.
Like on topics like this.
Okay. And on the innovation side, what would you say drives innovation in the retail sector? We now know who or where it comes from, based on the sort of headquarters and at the group level. But what are the sort of triggers where they're looking back, or they're looking at their business and saying, okay, we need to go here or go there based on our innovation?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it still comes back in our business to the customer, right? Because the customer is the one we're trying to reach every touch point of the customer. So if you think about like, the recent phenomenon, and recent meaning like last few years, has been like the TikTok growth, right? So if you talk about maybe addressing people our age, and I can say that because, we do hang out.
Yeah.
We were kind of that Facebook era, right? So if you want to get to us, you need to advertise on Facebook.
Yeah.
But if you want to reach consumers today, if you want to reach the right influencing consumers today, you need to go to TikTok.
Yeah.
Right. So there's obviously these kind of changes that drive behavior, and marketing on TikTok is completely different than
Absolutely.
putting a static ad on Facebook. So that's one angle. Then the other side of it is people are also receptive to the different cultural and societal changes that come up, right?
Yeah.
And you look at the entire, you can even look at the entire boycott, the boycott movement that's happened, right? So at first people chose to ignore it, but then as the financial results came out, you actually saw that there was a significant dip.
Yeah.
Especially, in this region as well, right? So, this region also felt it, right? Like there were several people who reached out to us and say, hey, can you help us understand, like, is this short term, is it long term? Or what do we do with it, right? Especially when it came to like the food businesses, right?
Because there are conversations or sort of, there's information out there that this region is quite different to the rest of the world because the region itself, they kind of own the brands solely, or nothing gets sort of distributed with that, right?
So there's two views, right? So one is so this is how customers react, right? So now what did brands in this region, the broader region, do is also highlight the fact that, it's local employment, local products, right? One headquarters decision does not reflect how we feel about a certain cause, but it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you can undo the whole thing either, but you have to highlight the fact that, like, look, there's a lot of things at stake, and like, we may not subscribe to this, but we're doing a lot of things to offset it. Now, whether that's good enough or not is up again for the customer to decide, right? But at least a lot of my clients, who are in this, who are impacted. If you think about it, they buy their meat locally. They buy their, they'll buy their dairy from Al Marai, right? They'll buy their packaging from a local UAE-based packaging who gives you, plates, cups, whatever. That whole value chain also gets impacted, right?
Yeah.
So it's not easy. But the customer, to come back to your question, the customer dictates a lot more, and that's actually one of the biggest learnings from this is people have a lot more power at the individual level than we ever thought.
Okay.
Right. So it's important that we are very close to them. We understand what their triggers are, both good and bad.
And how much of your job is based on a reactive nature, where clients are coming to you based on certain things, certain patterns that are happening then and there, as opposed to thinking ahead, say 12 months forward?
Yeah, so we do that. So we do a few times a year, right? Take a pulse of the of the industry.
Yeah.
We do it both as kind of a global consumer practice, but also as a regional practice, right? Where we'll do surveys, focus groups, or we'll at least do like executive roadshows to kind of understand what are the different things.
Yeah.
And obviously, we also have a set of global themes that we believe will impact this part of the world. So it's a conversation that we have regularly. But the reality of it is the business is very much still trigger driven, right? It's very difficult for a CEO in a market like this. The private sector is very complicated here, right? With inflation and all the different things, for them to say, hey, it's a great idea. Let me commission a expensive consulting project, which will also just be a strategy, right? It's not going to be
of course.
It's not going to drive to impact.
Yeah.
So, it's very much driven by, this. I have a very small amount of discretionary money that I have, and what is the best use of it.
Okay. You touched on e-commerce as being just like a smidgen compared to everything else for digital transformation, but keen to get your thoughts on how you see the future of e-com in this part of the world. I've been lucky enough to work throughout e-com here, Oz, the UK, the broader European sort of markets, and in all different levels of roles that I'm recruited for, I still feel that the e-com world here is nowhere near what it is around the world. What does it look like in, say, 5 years' time?
Hopefully better. So I understand where you're coming from. So yeah, look, e-commerce is definitely here to stay in every industry. We have to make it better. We have to drive penetration, etc. I also hold the view that malls are not going anywhere, especially in this part of the
Especially
world, right? I mean, it's too much of a part of our culture. And a day like today, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to be
Oh,
indoors,
you're in
right?
malls every day for 3 or 4 months a year,
Yeah.
right?
So
You have to be.
that's just a fact of life.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean, when I think of e-commerce or the role of e-commerce, I like to talk more about omni-channel because there's too many touch points between, let's say, the brick and mortar world and the digital world.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that people understand that and what that means. When it comes to kind of improving that overall ecosystem, as you also mentioned, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be done when it comes to even discovery, right? Like, you can argue that even a company like Amazon, the the way you experience it in maybe a country outside of here is different than
Yeah.
how you experience it here, right? And that's linked to, but that all basically links to availability of product, your delivery promises on
Right.
products, right? And then your basically overall returns and other experiences, right? So there's a lot of things that in developed markets that they've solved, right? Like returns. Like if I generate an Amazon return in the US, I get the credit immediately. The product hasn't even left my house. Right. And somebody will come pick it up,
That's
etc.
nice, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, but these things
Yeah.
matter, right, to
Yeah, of
people.
course.
But at the same time, they have their challenges as well, right? They have a lot of fraud, a lot of shrinkage. But in the scale market, as a percent of your total business, it's easy to do.
Yeah.
Here, I think the biggest challenge that they probably need to crack is not so much on the technology side; it's more on the inventory. So, what product assortment you have, because at the end, if the product is there, people generally, if there's something good at the right price, if you have to wait a day, chances are you'll wait a day.
Yeah.
Right? There's very few things you need immediately, right? And if you need it immediately, you probably were not going to shop online anyways, right? That the Q-commerce and all of those kind of sub-segments are interesting, but I don't know how big they can really be.
What's the one big change you'd make in e-com over the next 12 months that you think would have a great impact?
I would like to actually see the overall supply chain intervention change. That's where I would put my money. So I think we need, and that could be, depending on the individual company, it could be where the warehouses are located, what product you have inside them, how close is it to basically what people need, and then how you get it in their hands, right? So how quickly, and whether you use your own fleet or you outsource it or use a blend, but that service level is extremely important.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to touch on the people side. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't.
Yeah.
Anyone who hears me talk anywhere will always see a common theme around me focusing on the human side of business, and being a human-centric business will allow you to be more successful than most.
Yeah.
Focusing on bringing in the right people in the right way, onboarding them correctly, and so forth. Right. So you work for a larger business with 1,000+ staff. How crucial or challenging is it to actually not only identify the right people, but also retain the really good people in your business in such a competitive landscape when everyone's looking for the same skill set? Everyone's throwing money left, right, and center to try and bring people on board from one place to another. How do you, as a senior leader in a large firm like this, how do you sort of influence that in a positive way for your business?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting problem, and obviously it's also at a time of high growth, right? So it's almost like we're running short on people at any given time, right? If you look at the last few years, that's what it was, right? And at some point, I think we were bringing in 40 to 50 consultants a month, right? So it's crazy. Now, so how do we do it, or how should we be doing it? I think the first point is like, we have a certain expectation when it comes to talent and what we look for, both from a, let's say, technical competency perspective, but also from a cultural fit and kind of human component perspective. I personally believe we should never compromise on that, right? And even if that makes it harder, we should actually think about what it means, or look at other ways to fill those gaps than really compromise on those things. Because those, having that bar where it needs to be helps you ride the different
Yeah,
times or difficult times in the industry as well.
I agree.
So, that means when we go to campus or even when we look at, kind of industry hires or lateral hires, we need to make sure that that bar is very high. In terms of the people component, look, our business in this part of the world, obviously, we need to have a lot of trust in our people. We need to they need to operate independently, right? And at the same time, they need to be part of, what we call like the Carney fabric, right? Like they need to be kind of, entrepreneurial in some ways, but, kind of grounded in another way, right? Like we go to market as a consultant that you can roll up your sleeves with and work next to, right? We don't operate from a board, or we don't like to say that we operate from a boardroom or, we operate from 30,000 feet. We're with you. We're in the trenches, right? Like that's what we do. So we also need that we need people to reflect that, right? So whether it's a humbleness trader or modesty trader, we don't like people to come to us with like a big chip on their shoulder either, right? I mean, obviously, more power to them. If you're successful, you deserve credit. Don't get me wrong, but we need that balance. So then, how do you find and retain those people?
Well, how do you even identify that skill? Like during a process for me, like, and I've been doing this for over 2 decades. The hardest thing to identify in a interview process, no matter how many stages you have, is what kind of human being they are, what kind of morals and ethics they demonstrate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I mean, look, we try to test it through our interview process. The consulting interview process is a bit different. It also forces to see how you would think and what business decisions you would make, right? Given a small case or whatever.
Yeah.
So we like to test, like, is that the best business decision, but is it also the right human decision?
Yeah.
We try to look at this, but the reality is like you said, like at the end, we rely a lot on the people doing the interviews to also do that assessment, right? So we like to think, since we're also in the people business, we also are good.
Yeah.
We can also read people well, right? But that doesn't mean we're good at it or we always get it right.
Yeah.
What it means is like, we just have to keep trying. The benefit we have in our business is our business is also one of the highest attrition businesses in the world, right?
Yeah.
So, people come in, they don't like it, or they have different reasons on which they need to leave, either performance or, there's also a lot of rotation, right? So historically, it's been 10 to 15%, right, voluntary attrition, right? So, so that also allows us to kind of replenish,
get new people in, right?
Get new blood in, get new talent in.
Yeah.
But when it comes to retention, and especially retaining the good people, because those are not the people you want leaving. For me, at least, it's also being available to them, right? Like people also want to meet other like-minded people or work with other like-minded people. So one of the things we have to do as an industry is also be there for our junior staff, right? Like we have to make ourselves available. We have to expose them to what it means, to be a manager or principal or partner, right? Like we have to make ourselves, and we have to be that role model, because that's what people are going to see, right? And either they're going to like it or they're not going to like it.
Is that one of your leadership values for yourself personally?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's certainly I do like to lead by example, and I'm also, if people don't like that, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But I am who I am.
Yeah.
And I want to be true to that, right? Because that's also one of my learnings, kind of going back to some of the beginning, is the minute you realize that you're running your own race and you're not running a race with several others, is when you also have a lot more satisfaction in what you do, right? Otherwise, I can always look to my left or to my right on the plane, as you say, and I can feel like, oh, could I have done more this week, or could I have gone to this account this week? But if you're comfortable with what you're doing, also, that means a lot.
Do you work on yourself externally from your day-to-day job when it comes to leadership or just personal development?
No, I find myself reading a lot more. At this point in my life, I think, and I try to rotate between some kind of a business topic, to also some kind of, not like a leadership or just say inspirational topic, right? So like different biographies or things like that you just learn about how different people have done different things, right? So So yeah.
Okay. And on the human side, do you notice a huge potential challenge when you're dealing with customers or clients? The human side of them, is there a challenge with, the wrong people are making the decisions when I'm talking to these people?
Yeah, I mean, it happens. It happens everywhere. So I don't
Yeah.
think it's something unique
This
to
region,
any.
no.
No, I don't think so. But I think the reality is what we have to do is one of the things we do as consultants very quickly, or we should be doing, is also understanding who are the real decision makers, who are the real influencers, what are their triggers. And it's very important to get a handle on that because otherwise you will find yourself stuck, if you don't plan that or if you don't look more broadly, right? Eventually, those things come, later on in an assignment.
Yeah. Is there a huge emphasis internally in your business on the people and culture side to just gather everyone together to make them feel like they're having an impact and they're part of something bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been doing a lot more, and I think we can always do more, right, on that. Because at the end, we're a people business, right?
Yeah.
Like our revenue is generated from our consultants, right?
From the
Like
army
that.
of consultants
Yeah,
that are out there at the airports.
that's the product, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're not selling anything except
No.
except
people.
our people's ability to deliver, right? So it's really important that we do that, right? And also we've been seeing, at least there's a big generational shift, right, between millennials, Gen Zs, etc. And we also realize the triggers of what was good for one cohort does not work for other
Absolutely
cohorts,
not.
right?
Yeah.
Like, so, younger generation not really motivated by financial success, whereas like, you look a couple of cohorts ahead. I mean, that was a fundamental driver, right, of satisfaction in some ways. But so, we have to develop a lot more programs in terms of how do we keep people engaged? How do we give them outlets or avenues, if they want, even if they want, meditation, or if they want like options to do yoga, meditation, things like that. It's a very small thing, but these are things that people value a lot more.
Yes, they do.
So we need to do a lot more of being, kind of this well-being and mindfulness is become extremely important. And, to be fair, like, as maybe someone who wasn't part of this cohort, but when you experience some of these things, you actually understand there's a role for these things. It's important to disconnect, right? It's important to detach yourself from the day-to-day sometimes, and just take a moment to, relax or reflect or whatever. But we're seeing ourselves doing a lot more in that space to really make sure that our employees, have access to those things should they want it. They have kind of avenues to grow, right? Because it's just we have to react to what just like consumers, we have to react to what the people need. Yeah,
I mean that me time is a running gag in my circle, and my wife in particular, she encourages me to get it because she knows that mental switch off that I take on the weekend, whether it's for a couple of hours. And I was having a laugh with her on just this Saturday morning. I was at the gym by 6:30. I was playing paddle by 7:30. I was in a sauna by 10:30, and I was in the ice bath by 10:45. And I was like, and I actually felt so good because it was zero phones. There was no sort of emails, no talking to anybody else except for the people that I was with and exercising with and playing with, and just working on myself, working on my mindset. And there's no way someone would have convinced me of this 15, 20 years ago that this was so crucial to my day-to-day, to the way that I operated. So it is absolutely 100% the way forward.
Yeah, and you see it, right? Like, again, I was telling you, I do a bit of reading when you start to look at like other leaders, other successful individuals. You realize that everyone has this one block, or they do this one thing. It doesn't have to be exercise; it could be anything. That they do to really disconnect or kind of recharge. Right. And I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, definitely. One last question before we finish up, and I'm going to try and put you on the spot and give you an opportunity to make a bold statement and say, what is going to be the biggest thing that we're going to see in your space over the next 12 to 24 months that's just going to make everyone turn their head and say, wow, didn't see that coming?
Consulting space, or
consulting space, or you can even go into your industry, the vertical, the consumer retail space.
All right, let's start with consulting. So I think in consulting, I expect to see some consolidation in the industry. I think the industry is at a point globally and also in the region where things are slowing down. The years of heavy growth in every market is come down. So I think it's going to be time to take stock of all the different players out there. And, I would expect to see some M&A activity in the next 12 months.
Wow.
In
Okay.
that space.
Nice.
Yeah. In consumer and retail, I think, you'll probably continue. It's probably known, but I think you'll continue to see probably for the next 12 months, big domination by the Chinese fast fashion kind of players. They still haven't got it. There's still no defense around them, right? A lot of the markets in the region are looking at how to stop cross-border e-commerce and things like that. In the US, I mean, if you see what the business model is Temu's business model is that if you send parcels under $700, there's some tariff rule you can bypass, right? So they're basically playing this whole game. And by the time, legislation catches up, right, in a market like the US or even Europe, they would have made significant inroads.
Yeah,
so, I mean, there's all these things that's probably the biggest threat that exists for me. On the food and beverage side, which is also an area I cover, I had underestimated the impact that some of the GLP-1 drugs, the Ozempics and the Mounjaros, etc., would have. But you start to see now that, retailers forecasting of inventory when it comes to apparel and stuff completely off in every market because they weren't expecting the amount of consumption of these drugs, right? So it's another big consumer change that people are now expecting. So I think that looks like a trend that may continue.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing insights. Thank you so much for coming on board.
No, my pleasure.
It was worth the wait. I'm sure the listeners are going to take a lot out of this. So thank you so much for being a part of this, mate.
Good.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.